Welcome back to the Deep Dive, where we commit to sifting through complex source material to hand you the synthesis of knowledge you need to be truly well-informed.
Today, we are taking on a story that is, it's part scientific triumph, part historical injustice, and really part a profound cultural reevaluation.
We're diving deep into the life and, yes, the very contested legacy of Rosalind Franklin, a brilliant chemist and X-ray crystallographer.
Right, and she's often saddled with these labels, the wronged heroine or the dark lady of DNA.
Titles that really, they almost overshadow an extraordinary career that spanned three completely distinct high-level fields: coal, viruses, and of course the molecular blueprint of life itself.
And our mission today is to go far beyond just the famous, the famous Photo 51.
Absolutely. We need to absorb a thorough yet concise understanding of her comprehensive scientific contributions. Work that was appreciated in her short lifetime, especially in carbon and virology.
Oh, absolutely. She was a star in those fields. But her foundational role in the double helix discovery, that was largely obscured, really, until long after her death.
So to do that, we have to understand her method. Franklin was a scientist driven by this profound, almost philosophical commitment to empirical proof.
Yes. She believed the data had to speak for itself.
Ah.
It was an approach that was, well, it was both her greatest strength and, ironically, the very reason others were able to publish the key insight before she felt ready.
And before we unpack the sources chronologically, here's a fantastic little nugget that, for me, it just immediately signals the level of focus and rigorous intellect we are dealing with here.
Oh, this is a great story.
As a child, around the age of 6, the sources say she spent all her free time doing arithmetic, purely for pleasure.
Just for fun.
And she always got her sums right. That relentless, just innate pursuit of accuracy. It was baked into her personality right from the very beginning.
That extraordinary intellectual drive, it wasn't in a vacuum. It was nurtured in an environment that valued education and social responsibility very, very deeply.
She was born in 1920 in Notting Hill, London. Her family was not just affluent, they were highly influential within the British Jewish community.
Right, and it's so important to understand this family context because it genuinely shaped her entire worldview.
Her father, Ellis Arthur Franklin, was a London merchant banker. But he wasn't just, a finance guy. He was politically liberal, and he dedicated a huge amount of time to education.
He taught evening classes at the Working Men's College.
And eventually became the vice principal there. This is a serious commitment. And her mother, Muriel Frances Whaley, was just as central in creating this atmosphere of service.
And if you look at the broader family pedigree, it just shows this deep, deep history of public engagement. Her paternal great-uncle was Herbert Samuel,
Which is a huge name in British politics.
a massive figure. He was the first practicing Jew to serve in the British cabinet. First as Home Secretary and later Foreign Secretary. Just an immense political force.
And then on the social activism front, you have her Aunt Helen Caroline Franklin.
Right, who was deeply involved in the trade union movement and the women's suffrage fight. She later became a notable member of the London County Council. So this was not a family that just sat on the sidelines.
No, they believed in enacting change. They were active participants.
And that humanitarian commitment was, well, it was demonstrated in the most dramatic way possible during the rise of the Nazis in the 1930s.
Her parents actively helped Jewish refugees escape persecution. They were involved in the Kindertransport movement.
And they didn't just donate money. They took several children into their own home, including a 9-year-old Austrian girl, Evie Eisenstetter, who actually share a room with Franklin's younger sister.
So when you see that deep humanitarian focus, you have to ask, how much of her later scientific interest in these very practical, applications-based fields?
Like coal during the war.
Exactly. Wartime coal research. And then later, virus research aimed squarely at public health.
How much of that stemmed from this social consciousness rather than just pure abstract physics?
It feels like a key connection. Franklin always saw her science as inherently useful. Her training wasn't in, abstract theoretical physics. It was in the practical application of chemical systems.
And that practical focus, it really began with her education. She went to St. Paul's Girls' School in Hammersmith.
Which is crucial because it was one of the very few London girls' schools at the time that provided rigorous instruction in physics and chemistry.
She just excelled, became fluent in French and German, mastered Latin, all alongside her scientific achievements. She was a genuine polymath.
She was a star student. She won a scholarship to university in 1938. But there's another great anecdote that illustrates her family's values here.
Oh, right, her father.
Her father actually asked her to give up that scholarship to relinquish it so that a deserving refugee student could take it instead. It just shows you where their priorities were. They prioritized helping others, even over celebrating her own considerable achievements.
She attended Newnham College, Cambridge anyway, and graduated in 1941. And this led to her initial and very challenging attempt at postgraduate work.
Right. She tries to pursue a PhD in physical chemistry under Ronald George Rayford Norrish.
Let's just pause on that term, physical chemistry. For anyone listening, this is the branch of science that's all about the physical properties and interactions of chemical systems.
So you're applying the principles of physics, things like energy, force, quantum mechanics, to chemical phenomena. It's incredibly rigorous. It's all data-driven.
Exactly. It requires absolute painstaking rigor, and that's precisely where the conflict came from.
With Norrish.
With Norrish, who, by the way, would later win the Nobel Prize himself. He was described as obstinate and almost perverse in argument.
And Franklin found the whole experience so frustrating. She found Norrish so lacking in enthusiasm that she later wrote, and this is a direct quote, that she came to despise him completely.
So that early attempt at a PhD was short and unsuccessful, but it is so deeply revealing.
It reveals her incredibly low tolerance for what she saw as incompetence or anything that seemed scientifically sloppy. That fastidious nature would just define her entire career.
So when that initial academic path fizzled out, she pivoted quickly. She had to fulfill the National Service Act's requirement during World War II.
Right. And in 1942, she joins the British Coal Utilization Research Association, or BCURA.
And this is where she publishes her first truly groundbreaking work. It's focused intensely on the physical chemistry of coal, specifically its microstructure and its porosity.
And we have to remember, this was essential wartime science. This directly impacted fuel efficiency, safety. It was critical work.
Her research used these highly precise techniques. For instance, she used helium gas to determine the true density of coal, which allowed her to map the internal structure of these, porous, messy substances.
Her key discovery here was establishing the definitive relationship between the fine constrictions inside the coal pores and the permeability of that porous space.
Which sounds technical, but it's basically figuring out how gases or fluids could pass through the solid material.
So why does that matter to her career arc? It matters because this technical insight, it allowed for the accurate classification of different types of coals.
And more importantly, it had immediate wartime applications. These measurements were crucial for predicting how coal would perform as fuel, but also for vital defensive equipment.
Like gas masks.
Exactly, like gas masks,
Yeah.
which absolutely rely on a predictable filtration capacity. You need to know exactly what can and can't get through.
This was highly specialized, incredibly successful work, and all of this research formed the entire basis of her 1945 PhD thesis.
Which was titled The Physical Chemistry of Solid Organic Colloids with Special Reference to Coal.
So by the age of 25, she's already a published expert. She's known for her ability to bring mathematical precision to these amorphous, difficult-to-analyze materials.
And this mastery of difficult X-ray techniques, that was her scientific superpower. It's what she takes with her to Paris.
Right. That mastery of structure and these challenging materials set the stage perfectly for the next critical phase of her career. Her 4 years in Paris, where she fully embraced the tools of X-ray crystallography.
After the war, in 1947, she secured a position in Paris as a chercheur, which is a postdoctoral researcher at the Laboratoire Central des Services Chimiques de l'État.
And this was thanks to her friendship with a French refugee she knew, Adrienne Weil, a connection that changed her life.
It really did.
Now, we often talk about X-ray crystallography in the context of DNA, but for you listening, what exactly did this involve, especially in her field at the time?
Well, at its simplest, you're shooting a beam of X-rays at a crystallized substance.
Okay.
When those X-rays hit the regularly arranged atoms inside the crystal, they diffract or scatter, and they create a pattern on a piece of photographic film.
A pattern of spots.
A pattern of spots. And by analyzing the angles and the intensity of those scattered spots, the diffraction pattern, you can mathematically reconstruct the three-dimensional structure of the molecule that created it.
And the key here, and this goes back to her work on coal, is that Franklin wasn't starting with neat, perfectly ordered crystals.
No, not at all. She worked under Jacques Morin, and he was focused on amorphous substances, things like rayon.
Messy stuff.
Exactly. Amorphous materials lack that neat, repetitive, orderly structure of perfect crystals. And that makes the resulting X-ray patterns smeared, messy, and incredibly difficult to interpret mathematically.
So Mering was the expert in applying these challenging new techniques to these messy materials.
He was. So she applied her deep knowledge of carbon from her coal research, and she coupled it with Mering's sophisticated new techniques.
And she starts tracking the structural changes as carbon atoms convert into graphite when you heat them, a process that's critical to all sorts of industrial applications.
Her findings here are a lasting part of mainstream science, completely independent of her later fame. She coined the essential lasting terms graphitizing and non-graphitizing carbon.
And those terms are still used today, right? In material science, physics, chemistry.
Yes, they're fundamental. They're used to classify how different carbon-based materials behave when they're heated. This 4-year period in Paris solidified her status as a global leader in this niche, difficult field.
It's so clear that professionally this was a golden era for her. But what about personally? The sources all indicate she absolutely thrived in France.
Oh, she did. She was passionate about French culture. She was frequently out hiking, exploring, engaging in Parisian life. She explicitly described the culture there as, quote, vastly superior to that of English.
Oh.
And she found English people prone to fake and stupid faces and childlike complacency.
That speaks volumes about the intellectual and social freedom she must have felt there, compared to the rigid, stuffy British academic environment she'd experienced before.
It really does. And it sounds like Mering was an exceptionally supportive mentor, too. He fully recognized her talent.
He was apparently captivated by her intellect, but he also recognized her exacting standards.
What's fascinating is that while she kept her deepest personal feelings very private, she clearly gained immense confidence and refined her independent, rigorous style of research during this period.
It prepared her for the inevitable high-stakes conflicts that were waiting for her back in London.
She learned to trust her data implicitly, to believe in the proof above all else.
So Franklin returns to London in January 1951, and she accepts a 3-year fellowship at King's College. And this move, it marks the beginning of the most fraught, most important, and certainly the most documented 2 years of her entire career.
Right. She joins the Medical Research Council's biophysics unit, which was directed by John Randall. Now, initially, she was recruited to apply her X-ray diffraction expertise to proteins and lipids.
But Randall, who was very aware that the race to understand the gene was focusing heavily on DNA, he immediately redirected her. He saw her skill set and knew where it was needed most.
And this is where the notorious interpersonal conflicts begin. And they're rooted almost entirely in a foundational error by the director, a complete management failure.
Franklin was the only experienced experimental diffraction researcher at King's at that time. Randall assigns her the high-purity Cyner DNA sample, a highly prized resource, along with a graduate student named Raymond Gosling.
And Gosling had previously been working with Maurice Wilkins.
This is the crucial communication failure. Randall completely failed to inform Maurice Wilkins of this reassignment. He specifically failed to clarify that Franklin was taking over the DNA work and that she was operating as an independent group leader.
So when Franklin arrives, Wilkins, who was known to be shy, maybe a bit calculating, and was already struggling to produce high-quality X-ray images of DNA, he just assumed she was being hired as a research associate to assist him.
An assistant.
An assistant. And the clash was immediate and explosive. Franklin was a proven independent group leader from Paris. She was concise, impatient, direct.
Traits that often unnerved colleagues in the male-dominated and frankly slightly more reserved King's environment.
Absolutely. And Wilkins perceived her directness as arrogance. He actually called it her air of cool superiority. So the fundamental miscommunication created this zero-sum game before she even had a chance to set up her lab.
But the personal friction immediately yielded technical brilliance. Franklin inherited Wilkins' existing equipment, but she was, deeply dissatisfied.
Her expertise in physical chemistry just kicked right in. She refined the X-ray tube and the micro camera setup.
But what was her critical innovation, the thing that really changed the game?
It was controlling the environment. She built a tiny, humidity-controlled camera chamber. She did it by using saturated salt solutions to maintain these precise levels of moisture around the DNA fiber while it was being exposed to X-rays.
And why was humidity control such a breakthrough for studying DNA?
Well, DNA is a hygroscopic molecule. It interacts really strongly with water, so the amount of water that's bound to the fiber dictates its physical shape, its structure.
So Wilkins had been taking pictures of fibers that were probably, half dry, half wet? A mix.
That's the thinking. And that would lead to messy, ambiguous, smeared diffraction patterns. Franklin's innovation allowed her to isolate and stabilize the DNA in two completely distinct hydration states.
And using this refined, precise technique, she makes the immediate foundational discovery that DNA existed in two forms, determined entirely by humidity.
The drier form A, which was short and fat, and she initially called it crystalline, and the higher humidity form B, which was long and thin, and she called wet.
And Randall formally divides the work at this point. Franklin took the data-rich A form for intensive study, and Wilkins was left with the B form.
But even in her initial analysis of both forms, she was already making these key intellectual strides that confirmed the overall architecture of the molecule.
We know that in November 1951, she gave a lecture, and her notes from that lecture reveal she was already concluding that the structure was helical.
And critically, that the hydrophilic phosphate groups, the molecular backbone, were located near the outside.
That placement of the phosphate groups was a crucial piece of the puzzle. Other theoretical model builders, like Linus Pauling, were still proposing models where the phosphates were incorrectly buried on the inside.
And James Watson was actually in the audience for that lecture, but the sources all suggest he completely failed to comprehend the profound significance of her discovery about the external phosphate groups.
It's just astonishing that such a critical clue was missed by the competition, simply because they weren't rigorously focused on the crystallographic data itself.
It feeds right into this paradox that defines her story, the clash between her patient rigor and their speculative speed.
And her commitment to only reporting proven facts was absolute. In May 1952, after she recorded an asymmetrical X-ray image of aDNA, she temporarily concluded that aDNA was not a helix.
Yes, and she and Gosling, they famously drew up this satirical funeral notice for the death of helical aDNA. They signed it and sent it to Wilkins as a sort of dark scientific joke.
That anecdote brilliantly captures her scientific philosophy. She even had a motto: "We are not going to speculate, we're going to wait. We're going to let the spots on this photograph tell us what the DNA structure is."
And waiting meant doing the grueling, complex mathematical work. Throughout 1952, she and Gosling performed this intensive Patterson function analysis on their X-ray photographs.
Okay, let's unpack that term for you listening. What is the Patterson function analysis, and why was it so incredibly labor-intensive in the 1950s?
It's a very sophisticated mathematical tool in crystallography. An X-ray pattern, the spots on the film, is essentially a map of how the electrons in the molecule scattered the X-ray beam.
Right.
The Patterson function is the technique you use to convert that scattering pattern into a three-dimensional map of electron density. In plain terms, it's how you turn the abstract diffraction image into a concrete visual representation of the molecule's shape and the arrangement of its atoms.
So it's the mathematical process of turning this fuzzy photographic evidence into clear structural coordinates.
Precisely. And in the 1950s, before powerful computers, this required immense amounts of manual calculation. It was brutal. It wasn't about guessing. It was about mathematically deriving the coordinates point by point.
And this rigorous work produced the resulting photographs, which of course included the landmark Photo 51, which was actually captured by her student, Gosling, under her direction.
Photographs that were so spectacular, John Desmond Burnell later called them amongst the most beautiful X-ray photographs of any substance ever taken.
They were, without any doubt, the definitive empirical evidence needed to solve the problem.
So you have this situation. Franklin is sitting on the most beautiful, meticulously analyzed, and definitive data set in the world, and she's focused entirely on the painstaking process of mathematical proof.
Meanwhile, up at the Cavendish lab in Cambridge, you have James Watson and Francis Crick, and their approach is completely different. They're focused on model building a speculative, rapid-fire, trial-and-error approach.
And the pace of this race just accelerates dramatically in January 1953, because Linus Pauling, the world's leading chemist, was closing in on a solution himself.
Watson visits King's, and he's carrying a preprint of Pauling's latest draft, which proposed an incorrect triple helix model.
And Watson tries to engage Franklin in a collaboration, which, given their history and her complete dislike of his speculative style, only infuriated her.
And this is the moment that cemented the entire controversy. After this frustrating encounter with Franklin, Watson retreats and runs into Maurice Wilkins.
And Wilkins, in a moment of, frustration, and without Franklin's knowledge or permission, shows Watson the crucial bDNA image.
He shows him Photo 51.
He shows him Photo 51.
Watson, who understood the theory of helix, immediately understood the visual significance of that cross-shaped pattern. But the data transfer didn't stop there, did it?
No. The head of the Cavendish lab, Lawrence Bragg, encourages Watson and Crick to restart their model building now that Pauling's error was known. And critical to their success was getting access to Franklin's detailed scientific notes.
This is where the MRC report comes in.
Yes. Francis Crick receives a copy of a confidential Medical Research Council Biophysics Committee report from December 1952.
And this report contained detailed quantitative crystallographic calculations derived directly from Franklin and Gosling's data.
It was provided to him by his supervisor, Max Peretz, who had served on the visiting committee that reviewed the work at King's. This was essentially internal, unpublished, proprietary data being shared without permission.
And that confidential report provided two critical quantitative parameters that immediately broke the deadlock for Crick. First, it decisively confirmed the 34 angstrom repeat distance of the DNA structure.
And an angstrom, for context, is a tiny unit of length. It's 1/10,000,000th of a meter. That 34 angstrom measurement represented the exact length of one complete turn of the DNA helix.
It was a precise, quantifiable fact. It just narrowed the structural possibilities immensely.
And the second, perhaps even more revealing piece of data, was that the structure had C2 symmetry. This is the mathematical clue that immediately told Crick the molecule must contain two chains running in opposite directions, anti-parallel strands.
That C2 symmetry observation was just huge for them.
It was everything. If they hadn't seen that precise mathematical symmetry in her data, they could have wasted months, maybe years, building incorrect models with 3 chains or 4 chains or parallel chains. Franklin's painstaking measurements provided the immediate intellectual framework for the double helix.
But it's so important to remember that she was converging on the structure independently. Her notebooks show that by February 1953, she had successfully reconciled her aDNA and bDNA data.
She had. She realized that the B form was the true helical structure, and that the A form was simply an unwound version of it that appeared in lower humidity.
And she made a profound biological realization as well. She noted that the structure did not rely on the specific detailed order of the bases.
Meaning, as she put it, that an infinite variety of nucleotide sequences would be possible. This speaks directly to the mechanism of genetic variability, an insight that was entirely her own, derived from her data.
She and Gosling actually wrote a draft manuscript on March 17, 1953, confirming that their data was fully consistent with a multi-chain helix structure.
And this was the day before the news arrived at King's that the Cambridge model had been completed. They were that close.
The key gap she hadn't yet bridged was the specific complementary base pairing, the adenine-thymine, guanine-cytosine lock-and-key mechanism.
That was the breakthrough Watson and Crick made on February 28th. Once they had Franklin's geometric clues from the photo and the report, they rapidly synthesized the final correct structure.
They finished their physical model on March 7, 1953, and the famed trio of papers appeared in the journal Nature on April 25, 1953.
The order of publication was critical. Watson and Crick's theoretical model was published first, framing it as the discovery.
And their acknowledgement of Franklin and Wilkins was this muted, almost throwaway footnote, stating they were merely stimulated by general knowledge of Franklin and Wilkins' unpublished contribution.
General knowledge. It's an incredible understatement.
The detailed articles by Wilkins and then by Franklin and Gosling, the ones containing the actual definitive X-ray data and Photo 51, were published second and third.
A deliberate placement. It made their work appear to be supporting evidence for the Cambridge theory rather than what it was, the foundational empirical data that drove the discovery.
The ethical implications of that data sharing have, of course, fueled decades of discussion. Max Peretz later wrote to Science magazine, trying to excuse sharing the confidential MRC report.
Right. He claimed he was inexperienced and casual in administrative matters.
It's a pretty thin excuse. Regardless of his intent, intellectual property was shared without the creator's knowledge.
However, the popular narrative that Franklin died completely unaware that her work had been used, that's now being challenged.
A 2023 analysis of an unpublished 1953 Time magazine manuscript, which was written in consultation with Franklin herself, suggests the discovery was perceived at the time as more of a joint effort.
Right. The manuscript actually stated Franklin was engaged in checking the Cavendish model against her own X-rays, which implies a degree of collaboration in those final stages.
And her former colleague, Raymond Gosling, He later asserted that Franklin did know her work had been used before she died.
So this suggests that while the initial sharing of data was definitely unauthorized, the true relationship between the scientists regarding the final model was perhaps more cooperative in those final few weeks than the sensationalist race narrative suggests.
But what remains undeniable, absolutely undeniable, is that without Franklin's unparalleled technical rigor, her unique innovation with humidity control, and her precise measurements,
The C2 symmetry, the 34 angstrom repeat.
all of it, without that, the double helix model would have been a premature, incorrect speculation. Her data forced accuracy onto the world's most important biological structure.
So given that intense, competitive, and ultimately frustrating environment at King's College, Franklin made a necessary, and I think a critical move.
She left. In mid-March 1953, she moved to Birkbeck College, recruited by the crystallographer John Desmond Bernal.
She moved from the well-funded, established world of King's to a much more modest institution. And her famous quote just captures this perfectly. She said she was moving from a talus to the slums, but pleasanter all the same.
It really reflects the difficult, cramped physical conditions at Birkbeck, but the significantly improved collegial and supportive professional environment she found there.
That intellectual and psychological relief must have been immense for her. Bernal was known for actively promoting female crystallographers and for fostering a cooperative environment.
A stark contrast to the restrictive, competitive, and isolating atmosphere she had just left behind.
It's interesting, though. Bernal insisted she switch her research focus entirely and stop working on nucleic acids.
Right, but despite that instruction, she co-published one last paper with Gosling in Nature in July 1953.
She did. It confirmed that aDNA also had a double helix structure, following up on the Cambridge announcement. It was really a final closing of the chapter, asserting her own empirical proof.
But this shift in focus launched her into her second major field of scientific contribution, structural virology. At Birkbeck, she established her own research group and pioneered work on the molecular structures of viruses,
Specifically, the tobacco mosaic virus, or TMV.
which is an RNA virus, and it was a notoriously difficult subject for X-ray analysis.
A perfect fit for Franklin, given her success with amorphous carbon and coal. She began a highly successful and long-standing collaboration with Aaron Klug, who had just earned his PhD and joined Birkbeck in 1953.
And this really marks the beginning of modern structural virology. Her key findings on TMV started rolling out in 1955.
She definitively proved that all TMV virus particles were of the same precise length, an observation that contradicted the established eminent virologist Norman Parry.
But which she proved was empirically correct using her perfected X-ray techniques.
This wasn't just a technical correction, it was a fundamental shift in understanding how viruses assemble and reproduce. She showed the uniformity and the rigid structure of these particles.
Her work deepened really quickly. In 1956, working with Kenneth Holmes, her group discovered that the protein covering of TMV was made of protein molecules arranged not haphazardly, but in a tight helix.
And then, the very next year, collaborating with Donald Caspar, they made the definitive structural finding. The RNA inside the TMV is wound along the inner surface of the hollow protein cylinder. This explained the full molecular architecture of the virus.
That is just an immense body of work to complete in just a few years.
It is, and it connects directly back to her early expertise. She moved from solving the messy structure of carbon to solving the equally messy, complex biological structure of a virus.
And her reputation was growing rapidly on the strength of this work. In 1957, she secured a massive grant, £10,000 from the U.S. Public Health Service of the NIH, to research the poliovirus structure.
This was the largest research fund Birkbeck had ever received at that time, a real testament to her standing in the global scientific community.
Tragically, this final ambitious project on the poliovirus was forced to end because of her rapidly failing health.
Franklin was diagnosed with ovarian cancer in mid-1956. While exposure to X-ray radiation is always considered a possible factor for scientists in the 1950s, it's also noted that gynecological cancer incidence is particularly high among women of Ashkenazi Jewish heritage, which was her background.
The dedication she showed, even while she was undergoing aggressive treatment, is just staggering. Her group published 7 papers in 1956.
And 6 more in 1957. She literally worked until she could no longer stand.
Her final professional engagement was highly symbolic. She was invited to build a 5-foot-high model of the tobacco mosaic virus for the 1958 Brussels World's Fair, Expo 58.
And she used these mundane materials, table tennis balls, plastic bicycle handlebar grips, to create this stunning visual representation of the helical virus structure she had discovered.
That exhibit opened on April 17th, 1958.
The day after she died. Franklin passed away on April 16, 1958, at the age of 37 of bronchopneumonia, secondary carcinomatosis, and ovarian cancer.
And that term, secondary carcinomatosis, just for clarity, it refers to the widespread growth of cancerous tumors that originated elsewhere.
It means the ovarian cancer had metastasized throughout her body. But despite that horrific diagnosis, her final years were marked by this just incredible scientific output.
In a final poignant note about her personal legacy, her colleague and collaborator, Aaron Klug, was the principal beneficiary in her will.
He received £3,000 and her Austin car. It speaks volumes about the close working relationship and friendship that had developed between them.
So Franklin's untimely death in 1958, combined with the very stringent rules of the Nobel Committee, permanently cemented the controversy surrounding the 1962 Nobel Prize.
The Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine, which was awarded to Crick, Watson, and Wilkins.
The primary reason for her exclusion is simple, but it's absolute. The Nobel rules prohibit posthumous nominations.
They do not award it to the dead, and the prize can also only be divided among a maximum of 3 people. So she was ineligible simply because she had died 4 years prior to the announcement.
And there's another factor. The Nobel Committee often waits until a scientific discovery has been thoroughly, undeniably proven and applied.
Right. During her lifetime, the DNA structure was still contested in some circles. The committee waited until significant experimental proof of replication was established.
Specifically the Michelson-Stahl experiment.
Exactly, which was established between 1958 and 1961. This final, definitive evidence provided the necessary impetus for the 1962 award.
But the irony, the profound irony, doesn't stop with DNA. Her former colleague, Aaron Klug, the principal beneficiary in her will, he went on to win the 1982 Nobel Prize in Chemistry.
And his award was for his work on virus structures and nucleic acid protein complexes.
The exact field Franklin pioneered and introduced him to at Birkbeck.
It is highly plausible, if not nearly certain, that had she lived, she would have shared the 1982 Nobel Prize with Klug for her pioneering work in structural virology.
It would have cemented a second Nobel-level contribution to science.
The controversy that really dominated the narrative for decades, though, it wasn't ignited by the Nobel exclusion itself. It was ignited by James Watson's memoir, The Double Helix, which was published in 1968.
And that book is often cited as the root of what Franklin's own sister later dubbed the Rosalind industry of controversy.
Watson's memoir was immensely popular, but it was also highly subjective. While he praised her intellect, he simultaneously portrayed her as, quote, difficult to work with.
And famously, he repeatedly referred to her by the nickname she hated, Rosie.
A name that was used behind her back at King's, never to her face.
And we have to analyze why that narrative was so effective. It defined her legacy for a whole generation as this brilliant but temperamental, almost shrewish counterpoint to the swashbuckling model builders.
Francis Crick himself later admitted that he and Watson adopted a patronizing attitude toward her while they were at King's.
And this narrative immediately sparked criticism. The biographer Anne Sayre published a counter-narrative in 1975, arguing that Franklin was a victim of institutional sexism at King's.
And she cited details like the segregated dining facilities for men and women and her father's initial resistance to her academic path.
However, this narrative of severe, pervasive sexism is itself a complex historical debate.
It is. Franklin's sister, Jennifer Glenn, and colleagues like Crick and J.D. Bernal, they disputed this. They stated her parents fully supported her career and insisted Franklin was never a feminist in the social activist sense.
They argued that Watson's one-sided personal memoir was the true culprit in generating the controversy, not necessarily the entire structure of the institution alone.
But regardless of whether the institutional culture was purely sexist or just fundamentally competitive and poorly managed.
And it was likely a toxic mix of all three.
It was. But the historical consensus has recognized the inadequacy of the original credit given to her. The Nobel was awarded for the body of work on nucleic acids, yet the essential empirical foundation was Franklin's crystallographic data.
And recognizing this profound historical oversight, there has been a massive wave of posthumous recognition aimed at correcting the public record.
Right, to ensure her enduring impact is fully recognized, and this correction is visible globally now.
In 2004, The Finch University of Health Sciences in Illinois was renamed the Rosalind Franklin University of Medicine and Science.
And they actually use a stylized version of Photo 51 as the university's official logo. It's right there.
The European Space Agency named its ExoMars rover after her in 2019. Numerous academic buildings bear her name at universities all across the UK, cementing her as a scientific icon for future generations.
The Royal Society, which is the UK's National Academy of Science, established the prestigious Rosalind Franklin Award in 2003. It comes with a significant grant and is specifically aimed at supporting and recognizing women in the natural sciences.
And perhaps the most symbolic act of correction happened recently in Cambridge. In 2023, the famous blue plaque on the Eagle Pub.
The alleged site where Watson and Crick announced they had found the secret of life.
That plaque was physically replaced. The new plaque now includes her name, right alongside Crick and Watson, finally correcting the historical omission at the location most associated with the discovery.
Her legacy is now successfully crossing from academia into popular culture. She appears in plays, documentaries, even major commercial advertisements, ensuring that the full breadth of her contribution, not just to DNA, but to structural virology and carbon science, is finally becoming visible to the public.
So if we synthesize this deep dive, we see a career that was just remarkably successful across multiple, very difficult disciplines.
Right. She established the foundational, lasting structure of coal and graphite. She pioneered the molecular architecture of RNA viruses, establishing the field that led directly to a future Nobel Prize for her colleague.
And of course, she provided the definitive empirical evidence that cracked the structure of DNA.
She was a scientist who was defined by her scientific philosophy. She was fiercely committed to rigorous experimental data over theoretical speculation. Her mantra was always to let the spots on the photograph speak for themselves.
And that rigor forced accuracy onto one of the 20th century's most significant discoveries.
And here's the profound paradox that really defines her narrative. Franklin's brilliant adherence to absolute empirical proof ensured that the theoretical double helix model developed by Watson and Crick was fundamentally accurate.
Yet this very cautious approach, her insistence on absolute certainty before she would publish, that allowed the model builders the necessary window to synthesize all the information and publish the structure first.
This leads us to a final provocative thought for you to consider. When discussing her worldview back in 1940, Franklin rejected the concept of faith in an afterlife. She stated that her own faith lay entirely in the future and fate of our successors.
Given the immense infrastructure, the scientific awards, and the widespread cultural recognition now universally correcting the historical oversight, do you feel that her faith in the enduring legacy of scientific discovery was ultimately and quite spectacularly vindicated?
Her story is a vital lesson in the complexities of scientific credit, institutional culture, and personal dynamics in the mid-20th century. If you want to dive deeper into the dynamics of that race, start with the specific technical details of Photo 51 and the mathematical debates it continues to spark.